I came home early and watched my wife shove a man into our bedroom closet like I was the one who didn't belong there. I didn't yell. I didn't ask questions. I just walked over, turned the key, and locked him inside. My hands were steady. That's the part I remember most. Not the look on Denise's face. Not the way the closet door rattled once, then went still. Just my hands calm like I was locking up the office at the end of a normal day. But my chest, that was a different story. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears like a truck idling too close. Denise stood there in the middle of the bedroom, frozen. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked smaller somehow. Not scared exactly. More like caught off script. "Mark," she said finally, her voice thin. "This isn't..." I held up a hand, not angry, just firm. "Don't," I said, "just don't." I stepped past her out into the hallway and grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter. My thumb hovered for a second, then I typed out a message. "Can you come by? We need to talk. It's important." I sent it to her parents. Harold and June lived 15 minutes away, close enough for what I had in mind. When I walked back into the bedroom, Denise hadn't moved much. She'd turned slightly toward the closet like she could will it to disappear. "You locked it?" she asked. I nodded. "Why would you do that?" I leaned against the dresser, arms folded. "Because I'd like everyone to be present when that door opens." Her eyes flickered just for a second. Not confusion, calculation. That was the moment something inside me shifted. See, I'd been married to Denise for 28 years. You don't get that far without learning a person's tells. The way they pause before answering. The way they look when they're about to lie versus when they're just trying to spare your feelings. This wasn't either of those. This was something else. "I can explain," she said. "I'm sure you can," I replied, "but you can wait." We stood there in silence for a while after that. The house felt different, like the air pressure had changed. From the hallway, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. The AC kicked on, pushing cool air through the vents. Ordinary sounds. The kind you don't notice until everything else goes quiet. I walked out to the living room and sat down in my usual chair. The leather creaked under me. I reached over and adjusted the thermostat out of habit 2 degrees down. I always did that when I got home early. Denise followed me out a minute later. She hovered near the doorway like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to come all the way in. "You're overreacting," she said, but there wasn't much weight behind it. I looked at her, really looked this time. Her hair was a little off. Not messy, just rushed. There was a faint smell of cologne in the air, something I didn't own. And then there were the boots. Sitting by the edge of the bed, half hidden by the frame. Work boots. Dark leather, barely worn. I'd clocked them the second I walked in. Size 11, I guessed. I'm a 10.5. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated, just a beat too long. "A friend," she said. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. "You don't hide friends in closets, Denise." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "You came home early." I panicked. "Yeah," I said, "I noticed." Another silence stretched between us. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. For a second, I waited for the anger to show up. I figured it had to be there somewhere. 28 years, a shared business, a house, a life, and now this. But it didn't come. What came instead was something colder, clearer. Like looking at a map after you've been driving in circles for hours and suddenly realizing exactly where you are. "You know what's strange?" I said. She didn't answer. I kept expecting to feel something bigger, anger, rage, but all I feel is, I searched for the word, clarity. Her expression shifted just slightly, that flicker again. From the bedroom, the closet door made a soft sound, not a knock, more like a shift of weight. I didn't turn to look. "Sit down," I said, nodding toward the couch. She didn't move. Denise, I added a little firmer this time. Slowly, she walked over and sat on the edge of the cushion, her hands clasped tight in her lap. I checked my phone. No response yet, but it had only been a couple of minutes. "They don't need to be involved," she said quietly. "This is between us." I shook my head. "Not anymore." "Mark." "Not anymore," I repeated. Another stretch of silence, longer this time. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. And that's when it hit me, not the affair. Not even the man in the closet. Something else. A feeling I'd had a few weeks ago. Sitting in my office at the warehouse, staring at numbers that didn't quite add up. I'd brushed it off at the time. Told myself I was just tired. Now, sitting here in my own living room with a stranger locked in my closet, that feeling came back. Stronger, clearer. I opened my eyes and looked at Denise. This didn't just happen, I said. Her jaw tightened. No, I went on slowly. This has been happening. She didn't deny it. That told me more than anything else could have. From somewhere down the street, I heard the low rumble of a truck passing by. For a second, my mind drifted to the yard, to the drivers, the routes, the schedules, all the moving parts I trusted her to help manage. All the things I hadn't looked at too closely lately. I stood up and walked toward the window, glancing out at the quiet suburban street. Late afternoon, light-long shadows. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Behind me, Denise spoke again, softer this time. Please, unlock the door. I didn't turn around. Not yet, I said. Because by then, I was starting to understand something. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just a mistake. And whatever was coming next, I wanted witnesses. Before that day, I would have told you I knew every corner of my house, every squeaky board in the hallway, every loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, every window that stuck when the Ohio humidity rolled in. But that afternoon, sitting in my own living room with my wife on the couch and a man locked in our bedroom closet, the place felt foreign to me, like I'd walked into someone else's life by mistake. Denise kept glancing toward the hallway. I noticed every time. She tried to make it subtle, but after 28 years, subtle doesn't work as well as people think. Her left hand kept whirring the edge of her sweater. Her right foot tapped once, then stopped when she realized I was watching. Mark, she said, keeping her voice low, you're making this worse. I looked at her. I didn't put him in there. Her face flushed. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. She swallowed and looked down at her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she deserved it, but because old habits are hard to kill. When you've spent nearly 3 decades watching someone carry groceries, fight the flu, sit beside you at hospital visits, and laugh at dumb TV commercials, your heart doesn't just stop recognizing them because they did something cruel. That was the hard part. Part of me still saw the woman I married. The other part saw someone who had shoved a grown man into our closet and expected me to act like I was the problem. My phone buzzed. It was June. We're on our way. I didn't answer. I just set the phone face down on the side table. Denise saw it. They're coming, she asked. Yes. Her eyes widened. You had no right. That almost made me laugh. No right, I said. That's where you want to start. She stood up. This is humiliating. I looked at her for a long second. I agree. The words landed heavier than I expected. She looked away. From the bedroom, there was another sound. A faint knock this time. Careful, not desperate. Denise turned toward it immediately. There it was again. That look. Not embarrassment, not fear of scandal. Coordination. Like she was worried he might say the wrong thing before she had a chance to manage the room. I stood up. Sit down, I said. She didn't. Mark, please. I walked past her down the hallway. The carpet felt soft under my shoes, which somehow made the whole thing worse. There was nothing dramatic about it. No thunder, no broken glass. Just a middle-aged man walking down his own hallway to open his own bedroom closet. I stopped outside the door and listened. Quiet breathing on the other side. Back up, I said. No answer. I turned the key. The lock clicked. Behind me, Denise made a small sound like she wanted to stop me, but couldn't decide how. I opened the closet door. A man stepped out, smoothing the front of his shirt like he had walked out of a business meeting instead of my wife's closet. He was younger than me, late 30s maybe. Dark hair, trim beard, clean jeans, dark work jacket. The kind of man who tried to look rugged and polished at the same time. And I knew him. Not well, but enough. Ethan Cross, I said. His eyes moved from me to Denise, then back again. That was all I needed. Ethan Cross had done dispatch work for my company on and off for nearly a year. Independent contractor. New routes, broker contacts, driver schedules. Denise had pushed for him hard at first. He's efficient, she'd said, and we need the help. I had trusted her. That sentence had become a bad habit in my life. Ethan cleared his throat. Mark. I cut him off. You got 2 choices, I said. Sit down or I call the cops right now. His jaw tightened. Denise stepped forward. That's not necessary. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on him. Sit. For a second, I thought Ethan might try to play tough. He had that kind of face. The kind that looks better in confidence than in panic. But then he looked past me at Denise again. And sat. We all ended up in the living room like some miserable family meeting no one had scheduled. Ethan took the armchair near the window. Denise sat on the couch again, but this time not beside him. Too obvious, I guess. I stayed standing. Nobody spoke. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. Ethan rubbed his palms on his jeans. Denise stared at the floor. I looked from one to the other. It's strange what you notice when you stop reacting. The way Ethan kept checking his phone, but didn't unlock it. The way Denise's eyes darted toward him whenever I shifted my weight. The way neither of them asked what I knew. That bothered me more than anything. A guilty person usually wants to know how much trouble they're in. These two already knew there was trouble. They just didn't know how much of it had surfaced. Finally, Ethan said, "This is a personal matter." I turned to him slowly. "You were in my house," I said. "In my bedroom, in my closet. Don't dress it up." His mouth pressed into a line. Denise whispered, "Mark, please don't do this." I looked at her. "Do what?" She didn't answer. I nodded slightly. That's what I thought. The doorbell rang. Denise flinched. Not a little, flinched. I walked to the front door and opened it. Harold and June stood on the porch. Harold was 76, retired from the post office, still wearing tucked-in shirts and old man discipline like a uniform. June was smaller, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who noticed lipstick on a coffee cup from across the room. June looked at my face and knew something was wrong immediately. "Mark," she said. I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered slowly. Harold glanced into the living room and stopped. His eyes went first to Denise, then Ethan, then me. June put one hand to her chest. "Who is this man?" she asked. Nobody answered. I closed the door behind them. Denise stood up fast. "Mom, Dad, I can explain." Harold didn't move. His voice came out low. "Denise, why is there a man sitting in your living room looking like he just got caught stealing a Buick?" Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Ethan looked offended, which was funny in a sad kind of way. I pointed toward the couch. "Everybody sit down." June looked at me. "Mark, what happened?" I glanced at Denise, then at Ethan. "I came home early," I said. "Your daughter hid him in our bedroom closet. I locked the door. Then I called you." June's face changed. Harold closed his eyes for 1 second like he needed help from above before he said anything. Denise started crying then. Not full crying, controlled crying, the kind that still leaves room for strategy. "It was a mistake," she said. I looked at Ethan. He didn't say it was a mistake. He didn't look ashamed enough. He looked worried. That was the thing that stuck with me. He wasn't scared of me as a husband. He was scared of what I might already know as a business owner. And right then, with Harold and June sitting stiff as boards in my living room, I understood that the man who stepped out of that closet hadn't just walked into my marriage. He had walked into my company too. The thing about running a small trucking company is you get used to numbers that don't sit still. Fuel prices go up, you adjust. Drivers quit, you shuffle routes. Weather hits the Midwest, you reroute and eat the delay. It's never perfect, but over time you learn what normal problems look like. And then there are the ones that don't. 3 weeks before I walked in on Denise and Ethan, I'd been sitting in my office at the warehouse staring at a spreadsheet that didn't feel right. It was late, past 10. The drivers had all checked and the yard was quiet except for the occasional engine cooling down with that ticking metal sound. I had a desk lamp on and a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold. I remember scrolling through the numbers line by line. More loads. Less profit. Not by a lot, not enough to trip alarms, but enough to make the back of my neck itch. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. "You're tired," I muttered to myself. "That's all this is." After 28 years in business, you don't jump every time something looks a little off. If you did, you'd never sleep. So I let it go. That was my first mistake. Over the next few days, I noticed small things. A route out to Indiana that paid less than it should have. A couple of invoices that looked padded, not obviously, just enough to make you wonder if you remembered the original rate wrong. I asked Denise about it one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Dispatch fees look a little high this week," I said casually. She didn't even look up from the sink. "Fuel adjustments. Brokers are tightening margins." That made sense. It always did. Denise had been handling the books for years, longer than some of my drivers had been with me. She was good at it, organized, careful. I trusted her the way you trust your own routine. You don't question it unless something breaks. So I nodded and let it go. Second mistake. A few nights later, I stayed late again. The warehouse smelled like diesel and old paper. Rain was hitting the metal roof in a steady rhythm that made it easier to think, or maybe harder. I couldn't tell anymore. I pulled up the dispatch logs. Ethan's name came up more than usual. That wasn't strange by itself. He'd been picking up extra work. Denise had mentioned that. But when I started matching his jobs to the payouts, something didn't line up. His fees were higher. Not wildly, not enough to scream fraud, just enough to sit wrong. I stared at the screen for a long time. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, I said out loud. I clicked into the contracts. Some of them had been routed through a company I didn't recognize. That happens sometimes. Brokers subcontract. Layers get added. It's part of the business. But this one kept coming up. Same name. Same address. Indiana. I wrote it down on a yellow legal pad and circled it. Then I checked the approvals. Most of them were signed off by Denise. That wasn't unusual either. She handled a lot of that side of things. But I couldn't remember talking about these specific contracts. Not once. I sat there staring at her signature on the screen. After 28 years, you know someone's handwriting, like you know their voice. It was hers. No doubt about that. I closed the laptop and leaned back listening to the rain. This is nothing, I told myself. You're connecting dots that aren't there. Because the alternative. The alternative was something I wasn't ready to say out loud. So I went home, ate dinner, watched a little TV, slept, or tried to. That feeling stayed with me though, like a low hum under everything else. A few days later, I checked again. Same pattern. More loads. Less money. Ethan tied to most of it. That company in Indiana sitting in the middle like a quiet middleman nobody asked for. I looked it up properly this time. State registry. Basic information. The name didn't mean anything to me, but the listed contact, that did. It wasn't Denise. It was someone with her last name. A cousin, if I remembered right. We'd seen him at a couple of family gatherings over the years. Nice enough guy, kept to himself. I stared at the screen. My first instinct was to pick up the phone and call Denise. Ask her straight. Get it over with. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not exactly. Experience. In my line of work, you don't confront a problem before you understand it. You gather information. You make sure what you're seeing is real. Otherwise, you give the other side time to adjust, to cover, to explain things away. And Denise, she was good with explanations. Too good. So I didn't call. I dug. Emails. Payment records. Dispatch logs. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just pieces. Each one small enough to ignore on its own. Together. They told a story I didn't want to believe. Money moving in ways it shouldn't. Work being routed through people who didn't need to be there. Ethan right in the middle of it. And Denise, signing off. Late one night, close to 3 a.m, I shut everything down and just sat there in the dark office. No computer screen, no paperwork. Just me and the quiet. I thought about the first truck I ever drove, the long nights, the cheap motels, the way Denise used to stay up waiting for my calls back when we were younger. I thought about building the company from scratch. 1 truck, then 2, then 5, every contract earned the hard way. And now, I didn't know who I was sharing it with anymore. I'm probably wrong, I said into the empty room. But my voice didn't sound convinced. That was the moment something shifted. Not when I saw the numbers. Not when I found the company in Indiana. But right then, because for the first time I stopped trying to explain it away, I packed up my things, walked out into the yard, and sat in my truck for a while before driving home. Didn't turn the radio on. Didn't call anyone. Just drove. And somewhere between the warehouse and the house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Denise until I understood all of it. Not part of it. All of it. Which meant watching. Waiting and pretending everything was still normal. Turns out I was already 3 weeks too late. The next morning, I woke up at 5 like I always do. Habit doesn't ask permission, it just shows up. For a second, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house. No rain, no trucks. Just that early morning stillness you only notice when something's off. Then it all came back. The closet, Ethan, Denise. I sat up slowly and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The carpet felt cold under my feet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, checked the time again, like it might have changed. It hadn't. Denise was still asleep, or pretending to be. Hard to tell these days. I got dressed, pulled on a jacket, and headed out to the kitchen. Started a pot of coffee, same motion, same routine. Scoop, pour, wait. Normal things. That's what I needed right then. Something steady. While the coffee brewed, I stood by the sink and looked out at the backyard. The fence needed repainting. I'd been putting it off for months, too busy. Funny what you notice when your life shifts sideways. My phone buzzed, a message from my lawyer, Alan Green. Call me when you can. I'd reached out to him the night before after Harold and June left. Kept it simple. Told him I needed to secure some things quietly. He didn't ask questions over text. Good man. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the back porch. The air was cold sharp. It helped. I dialed him. He picked up on the second ring. Mark. Morning. Doesn't sound like one. I let out a breath. I need to protect the business. Accounts, contracts, everything. Is this about what you hinted at last night? Yes. He didn't push. Just said, okay, we can freeze certain accounts, limit access, put controls in place. You'll need documentation. I've got it. Then we move today, he said. But Mark, once we do, it's going to raise questions. That's fine. There was a pause. You sure, he asked? I looked out over the yard again. Yeah, I'm past being unsure. All right, he said. Send me what you have. I'll start drafting. We hung up. I stood there for a minute, coffee warming my hands, trying to steady something inside me that still wanted to believe this was all some kind of misunderstanding. It wasn't. I knew that now. When I went back inside, Denise was awake, sitting at the kitchen table. She had a mug in front of her untouched. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. We looked at each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, we need to talk. I nodded, we will. When Nesura? Saturday. She frowned, Saturday. I've called a meeting at the warehouse. Your parents, Reynolds, the CPA. Her face tightened. Mark, this isn't a business issue. It is, I said. She shook her head. You're blowing this out of proportion. That almost got a reaction out of me. Almost. Instead, I set my cup down and leaned against the counter. Then you won't mind explaining everything in front of them, I said. Her eyes flashed. You're trying to embarrass me. No, I said quietly. I'm trying to understand what's been happening in my company. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There it was. That hesitation. I told you, she said. Finally, it was a mistake. I watched her for a long second. A mistake doesn't involve contracts, Denise. Her shoulders stiffened. You went through my files, she asked. I went through my business. It's our business, she snapped. I shook my head slowly. Not the way you've been running it. Silence filled the kitchen again. She looked down at the table, then back up at me. You don't understand, she said. You're right, I replied. I don't. And I meant it. Because the numbers, the emails, the man in the closet, it all pointed in one direction. But I still didn't understand why. That part didn't fit anywhere. Mark, she said softer now. You've been gone a lot. You don't see what it's like here. I didn't respond. I've been handling everything she went on. The house, the books, the calls. I know what you've been handling, I said. She flinched. Not from the words. From the tone. I hadn't raised my voice, but something in it had changed. We stood there like that for a while. Two people in the same kitchen looking at each other like strangers trying to remember a shared language. Finally, I picked up my keys. I'll be at the yard, I said. She didn't stop me. Didn't follow. Just sat there staring at her coffee like it might give her an answer. The warehouse office felt different that morning. Not physically. The same old desk, the same scuffed floor, the same smell of diesel and paperwork. But I saw it differently now. Every file cabinet, every contract, every name. I sat down and started organizing. printed out emails, highlighted transactions, sorted everything into a single folder. Nothing fancy, just facts. At one point, I caught myself staring at a photo on the corner of my desk. Denise and me years ago, standing in front of our first truck, both of us smiling like we had no idea what was coming. I turned it face down, not out of anger, just not ready. By midday, I had everything I needed. Timeline, paper trail, names. I called Reynolds. Mark, he said, what's going on? I need you at the warehouse Saturday morning, I told him. 9 o'clock. That's serious. Yes. He didn't ask anything else. I'll be there. Next was the CPA. Same conversation, same answer. By the time I was done, it was late afternoon. I sat back in my chair and looked at the folder. It didn't look like much. Just paper. But I knew what it held. Proof. Or at least enough of it to start. The hardest part wasn't gathering it. It was living with it. Knowing what I knew. Going home that night and acting like nothing had changed. Denise was in the kitchen again when I walked in. Same as that morning. Same table. Same quiet. You set this up already, she asked. Yes. She nodded slowly. You're really doing this? I am. She looked at me for a long time. And for a second, just a second, I thought she might say something real. Something honest. Instead, she said, you don't have to. I picked up my keys from the bowl, set them down again out of habit. Yeah, I said, I do. Saturday morning was 2 days away. Plenty of time for second thoughts. Plenty of time to back out. But as I stood there in that kitchen looking at a woman I thought I knew better than anyone, I realized something simple. I wasn't doing this to punish her. I was doing it because I needed to see the truth in the open, where it couldn't be managed, or explained away, or hidden behind a locked door. Saturday came in quiet. No rain, no wind, just that flat, gray Ohio sky that makes everything look a little more serious than it needs to be. I got to the warehouse before anyone else. Old habit, I like being the first one in lights-off place, still nothing moving but your own thoughts. I flipped on the office lights. Same hum as always, same desk, same chair. I set the folder down in the center of the table. Didn't open it. Just looked at it for a minute. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd set up earlier and sat down. 9 o'clock came slow. First through the door was Reynolds. He didn't knock, just pushed the door open and stepped in like he always did. Late 60s, still built like a man who'd spent most of his life lifting things instead of talking about them. Mark, he said, nodding. Morning. He glanced at the folder, then back at me. You weren't kidding. Number. He took a seat, leaned back, crossed his arms, didn't press. Next was the CPA, Linda Perez, early 50s, sharp, efficient. The kind of person who notices missing commas in contracts. Morning, she said, setting her bag down. Thanks for coming. She gave a small nod and sat beside Reynolds, already scanning the room like she could feel something off in the air. Harold and June came in together a few minutes later. Harold looked tired. June looked ready. Denise was last. She walked in without looking at anyone directly, took a seat at the far end of the table. Didn't sit near me. Didn't sit near her parents. Just placed herself. That told me more than anything she could have said. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. 6 people in a small office, all waiting for something to start. I stood up. Thanks for coming, I said. I'll keep this simple. I didn't look at Denise when I said it. I kept my eyes on the table, on the folder. We've had some irregularities in the last quarter, I went on. Nothing obvious at first, just small things. Reynolds shifted in his chair. What kind of things? Routes paying less than they should. Fees that didn't line up. Linda leaned forward slightly. I noticed some variance in the last report, but nothing flagged. Right, I said, because it wasn't big enough to flag. I opened the folder. Paper doesn't make much noise, but in a quiet room, even that small sound carries. I pulled out the first set of documents and slid them across the table toward Linda. Take a look at these, I said. She adjusted her glasses and started reading. Reynolds leaned over to see. Harold and June watched Denise. Denise stared straight ahead. I kept going. These are dispatch records tied to a third-party contractor, I said. Ethan Cross. Reynolds looked up. I know the name. Yeah, I said, you should. I laid out the next set of papers. Here's where it gets interesting, I added. Jobs routed through him consistently cost more than similar routes handled directly. Linda flipped through a few pages, her brow furrowed. How much more, she asked. Enough to matter, I said, not enough to stand out on its own. Reynolds let out a low breath. That's deliberate. I nodded. Nobody looked at Denise yet. Not directly. But you could feel it building. I pulled out another sheet. This is the company those routes were funneled through, I said. Registered in Indiana. Linda scanned it quickly. Small operation, limited history. Check the ownership, I said. She did. Then she stopped. Her eyes flicked up to Denise. Is this? I answered for her. Family. Silence. Heavy this time. Reynolds sat back in his chair, his jaw tightening. You're telling me we've been paying extra to run loads through a middleman that didn't need to exist? Yes. And that middleman is tied to, he gestured slightly toward Denise, this. I didn't respond right away. Didn't need to. Denise finally spoke. You don't understand the full situation, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. I looked at her. Then explain it, I said. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Ethan, who wasn't there. That was the moment. Not when the papers hit the table. Not when Reynolds got angry. Right then. Because even without him in the room, she looked to him first. Reynolds saw it too. His expression changed. Where is he? He asked. I leaned back slightly. Not here. That's convenient, he muttered. June spoke up, then her voice quiet but sharp. Denise, what is going on? Denise shook her head. It's not what it looks like. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Because it always comes back to that line. It never is, I said, until it is. I slid the final set of documents across the table. Emails, I said. Payment confirmations, dates line up. Linda read quickly. Reynolds didn't even bother, he just watched Denise now. Harold leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. Denise, he said, his voice low, answer the question. She looked at him. And for the first time since she walked in, she didn't have anything ready. I was handling things, she said finally, keeping the business running. At a loss, Reynolds snapped. It wasn't a loss, she shot back. It was. What I asked. She stopped. Because there wasn't a clean word for it. There never is. I felt something rise in my chest then. Not anger. Something closer to it. Pressure. I had to pause. Just for a second. My hand rested on the table, steadying myself. I trusted you, I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. But it held. I trusted you with everything. The books, the contracts, the people. Denise looked at me, and for a moment I saw something real there. Not strategy. Not control. Just something breaking. You were never here, she said. The room went still. I let that sit, because that was the first honest thing she'd said. Then I nodded once. Maybe I said, but I was still the one building it. Reynolds pushed his chair back slightly, his voice tight. This cost me money. Linda added, this exposes us to liability. Harold closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at his daughter. We didn't raise you like this, he said. That one landed. Denise's shoulders dropped. Not all at once. Just enough. I gathered the papers back into the folder. Didn't slam them. Didn't make a scene. Just closed it. This is everything I have so far, I said. It's enough to move forward. Denise didn't argue. Didn't deny it. Didn't try to spin it again. Because she knew. There wasn't anywhere left to go with it. I sat down. Picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. Didn't matter. I took a sip anyway. Nobody spoke. And in that silence, something settled. Not victory. Not relief. Just truth. Out in the open. Where it couldn't be hidden anymore. After that morning, the warehouse felt quieter. Not physically. The same trucks came and went. Engines started, brakes hissed, drivers joked near the loading bay like they always did. Life doesn't pause just because yours cracks open. But for me, everything sounded different. Like I was hearing it from a step back. I spent the next few days doing things I hadn't done in years. Walking the yard at dawn, checking tire pressure myself, talking to drivers face to face instead of through dispatch logs and phone calls. Guys I'd known for a decade looked surprised to see me out there. Everything good, Mark, one of them asked. Working on it, I said. That was the truth. Because the company was still standing, but just barely in places I hadn't noticed before. A few contracts pulled back once Reynolds adjusted his side. A couple of clients asked questions after Linda flagged discrepancies. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to hurt. We had to cut 20% of the staff. Good people. Some of them had been with me through the early years. That part didn't feel like revenge. It felt like consequence. And I carried it with me every time I signed one of those papers. At home, things were quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The empty kind. Denise moved out a week after the meeting. No shouting, no drawn-out fight. Just boxes, a rental truck, a few short conversations that never went anywhere. The house felt bigger after she left. Too big. You don't realize how much space a person fills until it's gone. Not just physically, emotionally. Routines, noise, presence. I'd walk into the kitchen some mornings and still expect to see her at the table with a cup of coffee. Then I wouldn't. And the silence would settle in again. We talked a few times after that. Mostly about practical things, accounts, paperwork, the house. Once she tried to explain, it wasn't just about the money, she said. I believed her. Money doesn't make people do things like that. It just gives them a direction. You felt invisible, I said. She nodded. You were always working, always gone. The business came first. I didn't argue, because she wasn't entirely wrong. Running a company takes time, takes focus, takes pieces of you that don't always come back when you walk through the front door. But there's a difference between feeling alone and building something behind someone's back. I would have listened, I said. She gave a small, tired smile. Maybe? That maybe said everything. We didn't talk much after that. The legal side moved slow. Alan handled most of it. Civil actions, asset division, nothing dramatic, no courtroom shouting, just paperwork, deadlines, signatures. Denise lost control of the financial accounts early on. That wasn't revenge. That was protection. Ethan disappeared from the picture completely. Last I heard, he tried to keep working as an independent dispatcher somewhere else. Hard to say how long that would last once word got around. In this line of work, reputation travels faster than freight. A couple weeks later, I found myself back in the driver's seat of one of our trucks. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. There's something about driving that clears your head. The road doesn't care what you've been through. It just keeps going. I took a short run first. Columbus down to Cincinnati and back. Nothing fancy. Just enough to remind myself what the job felt like from the ground up. The engine noise, the weight of the wheel, the rhythm of the road. Familiar. Honest. No spreadsheets, no hidden accounts, no conversations waiting to twist. Just miles. One morning, a few weeks after everything settled into its new shape, I was standing out in the yard again. Early. Coffee in hand. The sky just starting to lighten. Engines turning over one by one. I watched as the first truck pulled out, then another. Routine. Movement. Life continuing. I took a slow sip of my coffee and let the air wake me up. For a long time, I thought about what had happened. Not just the moment in the bedroom. Not just the meeting at the warehouse. All of it. The years before. The trust. The small things I ignored. The bigger things I didn't want to see. And I realized something simple. I didn't lose everything. The company was still here. I was still here. And whatever we had built, it wasn't erased. Just changed. I don't miss Denise. Not the way people expect. But sometimes I miss who I thought she was. That version of her, the one from the early days standing next to me in front of that first truck, that's the one I still catch myself remembering. Then I remind myself, that person either changed or I never saw her clearly to begin with. Either way, holding on to it doesn't help. I looked out across the yard as another truck rolled toward the gate. The company's still standing, I said quietly to myself. And so am I. And these days, that feels like enough. If you've ever trusted someone more than you should have, you probably know how quiet the fallout can be. It's not always loud, not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just clarity. and the decision to keep going. If this story meant something to you, I'd like to hear it.